Coming up, what trades could the Nets make on draft night? What prospects are they targeting? What free agents are a priority? I'll answer all those fan questions and more after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And on today's show, it's a delayed FanTake Friday. I took questions and takes from all of you late last week, but news about Ace Bailey and the Kevin Durant trade forced me to push it back a couple days. But we got draft questions, we got free agency questions, and we have a lot more. So getting to those in the order that they came in, no order of importance. First one, what's the over-under on total Nets pick in the draft? I'd set it at 3.5. I think 3.5 sounds about right, and I'd take the under there. I'd probably go with 3. We know the Nets have 19, 26, 27, 36, and 8, obviously, so they have 5 picks there. And I think that there's a lot of different ways that they can go about this, but I think the one thing that is kind of assumed and known at this point is that they're going to look to consolidate. I think moving up to the late lottery could be something they could look to do. And if that's not feasible, I think there's a lot of teams that are going to want to get into the 20s of this draft, potentially who don't have picks there because of the depth of this class. So they could look at 26, 27. They could try to move off one of those or both of them to, push that maybe to a later draft or something where it could potentially have some ability to fall higher for them. So there's a lot of different ways they can go about it, but I would expect them to consolidate. I think bringing in 5, even 4 rookies is pretty difficult. So I'd say 3 is probably the number I'd take. So 3.5 feels like a good over-under, and I would take the under there, probably going with 3. Next one, all Ace Bailey stuff, 3 of them. I'm going to bunch them all together. But first being, Erik, do you know if there were private meetings or workout held with Ace Bailey other than the 10 Rutgers home games that the Nets attended? Next one, just give us your opinion on this Ace Bailey stuff. Is there a possibility he wants to be a Net? And last one, do the Nets draft Ace Bailey at 8 if he is available? Is that a red flag to take him there? Answering all those, I don't know of any private workouts that were held with Ace Bailey. I can't say whether that has or hasn't happened. I know the Nets obviously have that ability to have some late meetings, some private meetings, because everybody's in New York, getting there for the draft. Ace Bailey, a guy who played college ball in New Jersey at Rutgers. So the Nets have done late workouts with some guys. I mean, usually they do some high-level guys. So I remember, I think they brought Derek Lively in for a really late workout the year of that draft. Could they have done that with Ace Bailey? They could have. Could they still do that? Maybe, yeah. But I don't know whether or not that's happened, but it's a possibility. Next one, is there a possibility he wants to be a Net? Definitely a possibility. I think it's been reported that he does want to be a Net. Jonathan Givony just went on ESPN and said that Ace's 3 preferred destinations were the teams that are picking 6, 7, and 8, with the Wizards, Pelicans, and Nets in that order of where they're picking. So I don't think there's any question that he sees the Nets as a desirable landing spot. And, that's not surprising given what his camp is reportedly seeking, which is an advantageous geographic location and a playing time, a team that can offer him playing time. You look at the Nets, a team that's playing in the NBA's top market, but is in the early stages of a rebuild and could offer Ace all the ability to, do what he wants offensively or within what their structure is, give him an extended leash and a featured role offensively. I think that that's a team that makes a lot of sense for him. And that's a team, obviously that he has some interest in. Do they draft him at 8 if he falls that low, or is it a red flag? I would take him at 8 if he were there. I think when you look at a guy who has his blend of size, shot making, fluid athleticism, I think there's just so many tools there you could work with. Obviously, the decision-making is a red flag. The shot selection, the passing, the ball handling, those things. But, there's a lot of tools that you can work with there. The camp and the circle of people that he has around him, that obviously has some people concerned, but He is a very tantalizing prospect. And if you have intel and you know the circle that's around him and you're comfortable with that and you're confident in your development staff, which I think the Nets are based on what they've been able to do, I think that you definitely take him at 8 if he's available there. Next one, if the Nets draft at 8 realistically, who would you be pleasantly surprised that could be available? There's a few guys, but staying on Ace Bailey, like if he were available at 8, I think I'd be pleasantly surprised. He's a guy who was, mocked in the top 3, top 2. Some people were even saying that he could potentially challenge Cooper Flagg for the top overall pick entering this college season. I think that obviously turned out looking foolish, but there's a reason that he was mocked up there, and it's the size, the shot making, some of the things he's able to do offensively, just the baseline tools that he has. On both ends, the defensive end, I think he has some potential also. But if you have all those things, those are things that aren't often available at the 8th pick in the draft. So I think that it would be a pleasant surprise if he was there and the Nets were able to get him there without giving up any assets. Would it be a red flag? Potentially, but it all depends on the Nets intel and what they have. And I think that they're confident in their process. Another guy who I'd be pleasantly surprised being available at 8, and he's a guy that really hasn't been linked to or mocked to the Nets much because I think the expectation is that he goes ahead. But Trey Johnson out of Texas, a guy who, I would be surprised if he's there at 8, but it would be pleasantly surprised that it would be a great player for the Nets to come away with, in my opinion, because the best three-point shooter in this draft, just a certified bucket getter, can score in a variety of ways, really a tough shot maker, but also has some good ball handling ability. I think he's underrated as a passer. And, while I think the defense isn't anything that he's known for, is going to be a calling card, he's a guy who's still close to 6'5", has a 6'10" wingspan. So there's some measurables there. I think, based on some of the athletic profile and the combination of that and the size, he should be able to not be a liability defensively. Maybe he can come out just being a wash there. And if you couple that with the offensive ability, I think that would be really intriguing, for the Nets to be able to potentially come away with a player like that at 8. Going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we got more draft questions. We got rebuild questions. We have free agent questions, all that coming up next. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Look, guys, it's the summer. Maybe you're going out to eat more. You're hitting a sporting event, going to a concert. All that starts to add up. Monarch Money helps you track your spending and meet your financial goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and text from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off their first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will move them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, a delayed FanTake Friday. Got a lot more takes and questions. First one up here, just a take and want to know what you think about it. BJ Johnson seems to value a lot of size and versatility, as he said in Scout episode 3. Will Riley can be interesting between 19 and 27. Considering that, and if it really matters a lot, taking Fears might be a little surprising. I think, size, versatility, I think things that every NBA team is going to be valuing, especially when you look at, how the finals just played out and what those teams had from a roster building perspective. Will Riley, I think, a very interesting player, a guy who, a bigger wing, 6'8", close to 6'9" wingspan, really has some, secondary shot creation, self-creation, playmaking ability. I think things that are really interesting from that perspective. The, 3-point shot is a work in progress. He didn't shoot it consistently well this past season in Illinois, but he shot, I think, close to 40% as a senior in high school. Also was just a tough shot maker, made some really tough shots, off the catch, off the dribble, put on tape there at Illinois. So he's a guy that I think is intriguing from what he can do, from on the wing, from, some of those secondary skills he has, if he can get that, shot creation, if he can get that facilitation, if he can develop that further. And also, the 3-point shot comes around, and this year was more of just an outlier year. He's a guy who can be really interesting offensively. And then defensively, you obviously have the size. He's taller, a little bit of a slighter frame, but that size, that potential offensive versatility, I think is really interesting. I think would be an interesting pick for the Nets at 26 or 27. I think 19 is probably a reach there, but a guy that I definitely could see them having interest in. And on Jeremiah Fears, I get what you're saying. If the Nets are valuing, versatility and size, he doesn't necessarily check those boxes. He's not small from a height perspective. 6'2.5" without shoes, probably plays like 6'3", 6'4". So that's not terrible size for a point guard, but he does have a slight frame and is definitely not known for his defense. But if the Nets were to take him, that would be a bet on his offensive upside. The name of the game in basketball, it's still putting the ball in the basket. And Jeremiah Fears has really intriguing skills from his ability to just, be a paint touch and get into the paint whenever he wants. So if he can develop, if the Nets are confident in, the finishing coming around, if they're confident that his 3-point shot, and this was just an outlier and shot diet and all that played into it, and they think he can be efficient, really good offensively, I don't think the size or the defensive concerns are necessarily going to scare them away from him. That's why we've heard that they are, pretty interested in him. They've been linked to him consistently. So if they are to take him, I think that would be a bet on his offensive game, and it would be, them kind of considering that the priority and, that stuff being hard to come by, and then living with some of the other stuff. So that's how I see that there. Next one, what's your take on our current development staff given Cam Thomas's botched development? So this fan clearly has some strong opinions about Cam Thomas's development, saying that it was botched. I think that that's a little bit strong. Cam's first 2 seasons, he didn't play because the Nets were trying to compete around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And he is a guy, they were looking for more of those role player attributes and the guys alongside those stars and, 3-and-D guys who have more of those complementary skills. And those obviously weren't Cam Thomas's strengths. I have said, though, during that 2022-23 season, after they traded Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and they brought in, Mikal Bridges, Spencer Dinwiddie, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, they were still trying to win and they desperately needed scoring, with that team during the second half of the year. And they still kept Jock Vaughn, kept Cam Thomas on the bench throughout that season. I think that was a mistake. And I've, been pretty open with that take. But since then, they, have really given Cam a feature role. He's emerged as the team's leading scorer. Since Jock left, Kevin Ollie was brought in, and then Jordy Fernandez. He's really been their go-to guy offensively. So to say they botched his development, I don't think that's necessarily fair. Could they have gotten him more reps early on? Sure. But he's still shown, really elite scoring flashes. The playmaking and defense are things that I think he's going to need to buy into. I think the Nets staff can do things to help him there. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to get him to buy into that. And I think he has at point shown, a buy-in in some regard to be a more willing playmaker, a more engaged defender. So if he can continue to do those things, I think he has an encouraging runway as a prospect. And I expect him to be back in free agency. The Nets' exclusive negotiating period began Monday morning. It's going to run until June 30th. So I think he'll be back. I think he'll have more time to audition for this Nets team as they continue the rebuild. And I think if he can round out some of those less polished aspects of his game, he still has a really encouraging runway. So I wouldn't at all say it's a botched development. I think he's a guy who's going to get an annual salary probably close to $20 million or maybe even above. And for a guy who was picked, at the very end of the first round, I don't think you can say that they botched his development in that regard. Next one, with the Nets not being able to tank successfully this past season as well as they should have, who is more to blame, Sean Marks or Coach Jordy? I don't necessarily think anyone is to blame. I mean, I think a lot of fans look at it and say that Sean Marks could have shown more urgency, could have gotten off of guys like Dennis Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith earlier than he did. And that's obviously opened the season 9-10, and that kind of put them behind the 8 ball. But I'm not available. I don't know what trades were available to the Nets, during last offseason. So it's tough for me to say, could Sean have gotten off of them easily? Obviously, he was prioritizing taking back expiring contracts and ultimately did do that, taking back D'Anthony Melton from the Warriors and D'Angelo Russell from the Los Angeles Lakers. And the reason he was prioritizing that was to maintain the cap space that we've heard so much about leading into the offseason. I think we can see why, because the Nets are now the only team with significant cap space, and that could put them in a position to potentially gain some assets. So if Sean is able to capitalize on that cap space, gain some more assets, that could, you would see there's more of a trade-off, and maybe that makes it more worth it than him not getting off those guys early on. So, and then from Jordy's perspective, Jordy just got guys to buy in. We got guys to punch above their weight a little bit in a lot of these games last year. When you're a coach, you're getting players and, your job is to win with whoever's put out on the floor. Jordy's not going to tank. That's a management decision. So I guess you could blame Jordy saying he got them to buy in and got them to do more than they should have, but it's not a bad blame. That's a good blame. And, from Jordy's perspective, I think that's, what he's going to continue to try to do, as he should. So I'm not sure anybody's to blame. I think, Sean clearly was prioritizing cap space this summer and was able to get that. So if he's able to capitalize on that, I think that makes it maybe not look as bad the way some of this ended up. But, we'll see. Next one. Do you think we wait until draft night to make some trades to ensure they get the guy they want? Trades can happen before draft night. They could happen, today. They could happen tomorrow. They can happen whenever. Do I think that the Nets could look to, make trades as things are unfolded when they have a sense of how the board is going? Definitely. Like, that's how a draft goes. BJ Johnson talked about it on Scout that, the draft's unpredictable. You need to be prepared for anything. So, the Nets are going to be prepared. I think trades could come, right after this is posted. Trades could come on draft night, but I think that the Nets will be involved in trades. And I think that, they'll be looking at how the board shakes out and trying to see what is advantageous for them in those scenarios. Last one before another quick break. Mock trade. Raptors get number 27 in this draft, plus their 2029 first round pick. The Nets get their 2027 swap negated. That one doesn't really work because the Nets don't own the Rockets' 2029 first round pick. There's like 3 swaps on that, and the Nets own the least favorable. So the Rockets don't have to worry about getting that back from the Nets because, they already got back that in the deal where it was the pick for pick deal last summer. That's a swap on that. So Houston doesn't have to worry about, getting that pick back from the Nets. Is there a framework where the Nets could potentially get that 2027 swap back? Sure. I mean, they have a lot of assets, but I also think that, that's going to be the season after next. I think the Nets are going to be hoping to take a step back towards contention there. So I think the assets that they would potentially be using to get that swap back, I think they'd rather keep those assets and use them to make the team better to, a point where they don't really have to worry about that swap being too bad. So I think that's the more realistic path there. Going to take one more quick break, and then we got back. When we come back, we got more draft questions. We got a couple free agent questions and a little bit more. So we'll round out today's Locked On Nets episode after this. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Look, guys, maybe you're watching a Nets game and Cam Thomas is heating up while Nick Claxton's blocking shots. With FanDuel, you can combine live prop bets as the action unfolds. You've got a read on who's heating up. Why not back it up with a same-game parlay? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Rounding out today's Locked On Nets episode, this delayed FanTake Friday. Got a few more of them here. This is a take. It says, at 8, you get Noah Asenge. If we can get a second lottery pick, you pair him with Jay Fears, Kasparis, or Yegor. I love Jay Fears, but we must take Noah Asenge at 8. I get what you're saying there with Asenge. I mean, I've talked about him at length. He's been a guy who's been, increasingly linked to the Nets, and he's a guy who is very intriguing for what he's been able to do at an extremely young age, producing at the professional level for Ratio Farm there in the BBL in Germany. He's a guy who started the year at 17 years old, and he has a lot of intriguing traits. I mean, you look at just the measurables, first of all, 6'10" barefoot, over 7-foot wingspan, just some of the things he's able to do on the court in terms of being a secondary ball handler, transition ball handler, drawing fouls at an extremely high rate, showing some playmaking flashes, obviously has defensive capabilities. He's a guy that would be an upside swing for the Nets at 8, and you'd really be betting on him growing into that frame a little bit more and potentially being able to be a guy who can maybe make some more three-point shots, be a secondary ball handler, be a guy who can kind of offer some self-creation, some floor spacing, some defense, kind of a jack of all trades and do it all. So that wouldn't be a bad bet. And then if you're talking about pairing him with a lead ball handler, I think, if you get a second lottery pick, probably going to be a late lottery pick. I think Jeremiah Fears, they'd probably be unlikely the Nets get him there. You look at how the board could shake out. There's going to be teams like, Washington at 5, New Orleans at 7, Utah at 5, Washington at 6, New Orleans at 7. I think those are teams that will have interest in Fears. So I don't know if he gets to a late lottery pick, but the other guys, Kasparis and Yegor, I think would be interesting to pair with Asenge as kind of true lead ball handlers. I'd be more interested in Kasparis Yakachonis in that regard, but you get Asenge, he's an upside swing, a guy who can pop and potentially do some more things offensively, and then you pair him with a true lead ball handler. Definitely an interesting take, an interesting possibility there. Next one, can the Nets trade up and trade into the late lottery, and what would that look like? There's, several ways that the Nets could look to trade into the lottery. You look at what they have beyond number 8. They have 19, they have 26, they have 27, they have 36. You could look to package those. You could look to move up. You also have, veterans and Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton who could potentially be available for trade. And you also have all this cap space. So you look at that, there's a number of ways they could look to do it. We've talked about them potentially being trade partners with the Raptors at 9, the Suns now have the 10th pick. The Suns, a team I talked about yesterday, they need a center. With Nets have Nick Claxton. They need to get all some contracts. The Nets have cap space. Is there a way that they could look to work maybe a swap of 19 and 10? Maybe Claxton's involved. Maybe some salary dumps are involved. There's something that could work there. I know the Nets have been talking to the Raptors. The Raptors have been looking to get win now help. Could Cam Johnson be a guy who fits there? I know we heard some smoke about that from Nets Daily a few weeks back. So just with the picks that the Nets have, with 19, 26, 27, 36, also having the cap space and those veterans, they just have a lot to work with. And I think there's a lot of teams where there's deals that could make sense there. So using some assortment of those things could help them move up. Keeping it going. Has Mark learned the tanking lesson taught him last season by Dennis Schroeder? If you don't want to win too many games, cut off the head of the snake and don't have a competent floor general on the roster. We don't currently have a real point guard. Will they try to get one? Did he learn his tanking lesson? Maybe. I mean, the Nets definitely punched above their weight. I think Dennis Schroeder probably played better than Sean Marks expected, and that led them to win some more games. So maybe he learned a lesson in that regard. But also this year, the Nets are just going to have a lot of rookies coming in. They're probably going to have 3, maybe even 4 rookies coming in. And that's naturally, if you give those guys minutes and you have less veteran guys on the team and more young guys, that's going to organically just lead to more losing. It's going to lead to, usually those rookie guys have trouble, especially if you're talking about rookie point guards, rookie lead ball handlers. They rarely play well. There's a lot of growing pains. So that could be a way that they could just more organically lose some games. And it could still be fun because you're looking at the development of these young guys and how that works. So, will they try to get one? Try to get a point guard? D'Angelo Russell obviously is a guy that they have who's an unrestricted free agent. I don't think his market's going to be too expansive. Could they try to bring him back maybe on a short-term deal with the purpose of using him as a tradable salary later on? I think that could make some sense because the Nets still do have to reach, they have to spend their cap space on something. So if they have some cap space left and they want to, sign Russell to a mid-sized short-term deal, they could then use him as a tradable guy. So I think that that's something that could work, but I don't think that Russell's really going to be a priority. So I'd expect this team, this roster construction to look a lot different. I think there's a more organic way that they could look to tank. Last question, rounding this out. Let's say the best player at 8 is Kaman Maluach, so the Nets pick him. Who is gone, Claxton or Sharp? If the Nets got Maluach and they're moving off of one of those other guys, I think Claxton's the more likely guy to be gone. I think that he would just have more trade value at this point. And he also, if you get Malawach, you have two guys in him and Sharp who are younger, could fit the Nets timeline more. And if you're going to trade Claxton, you could potentially get some real assets back for him. We know that the Los Angeles Lakers have been linked to him. We know that the Phoenix Suns now are trying to retool around Devin Booker. They have a need for a center. Those are two teams that you could potentially look to work something out with. So if Malawach is to pick at 8, which I don't think would be a bad outcome for the Nets at all, I think, it's not a foregone conclusion that they would move off Claxton or Sharp, but I think that you could, that would be a likely, or there would be a logical that could be a move. And I think Claxton would be the guy in that scenario who would be the more realistic of the two for the Nets to move off of. But that does it. That's all the questions, all the takes we got. Thank you to everybody who submitted. I'm going to try to keep this going throughout the season. This Friday, we're going to be coming fresh off the draft. We're going to have a lot of stuff, so we'll see if I can get to it. But appreciate all of you for participating. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Anything you can do to engage, like, comment is much appreciated as I try to build this channel. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.